Actually, it really goes back to the 1950s when two anesthesiologists joined the New England Deaconess Hospital and began to provide anesthesia there for the surgical staff. Prior to that, at the Deaconess, that had nurse anesthesia fully. By 1970, the group had grown to 4 persons, and I joined the group moving there from the Brigham Hospital. In 1975, however, the 2 original members of the group retired, and we reformed it and named it Anesthesia Associates. A few years later, we took on our second hospital, the Faulkner, and began to grow even more rapidly. In the early 80s, we began to have residents rotate from the Brigham Hospital, and through the 80s, we added several surgery centers, several other hospitals, and a number of staff persons and nurse anesthetists. By 1990, there were about 25 physicians and 25 or so nurse anesthetists covering a number of institutions. During that time, we continued to increase the residency program, with residents then coming not only from the Brigham, but also from the Beth Israel and the Mass General Hospital. And in the early 90s, we increased the number of residents to about 12 or 15, rotating through for 2 months at a time, still, of course, remaining in their parent program. The research activities began about the same time that the residents were there, and one of the first projects was to look carefully at the outcomes of peripheral vascular surgery, whether it be under general anesthesia or regional anesthesia. Interestingly enough, it turned out that the general anesthesia was at least as safe as the regional in our hands. This was in contrast to many other studies in a few years prior to that. When the group reformed in 1975, I was named president and remained that for some 20 years. Also at the same time, the New England Deaconess Hospital was becoming fully academic, with named departments and on an equal basis at the Harvard Medical School with all the other Harvard hospitals. This is one of the reasons that we moved in our anesthesia group to a combination of private practice, academic anesthesia, which was extremely successful in the view of most members of the staff. Early on, became very interested in quality control and the then brand new patient safety movement. As it turns out, in my early years as president there, I also became president of the American Society of Anesthesiologists with a lot of support from the group. It was my opportunity to set up the first patient safety program in the ASA and establish a committee on safety, followed shortly by the Anesthesia Patient Safety Foundation establishment. And I would guess that the Deaconess was the first hospital in the city of Boston to have every operating room contain pulse oximetry and capnography. And we led the way really for the rest of the teaching hospitals in the city. We were very much admired by the surgical staff and the hospital administrations everywhere we went, because I think we provided such high quality anesthetic care. As a matter of fact, we never had a suit, even though some of the other teaching hospitals had a number of them, and we led the way in establishing the Harvard guidelines standards in the mid-'80s, because it was felt that such guidelines and standards were well needed. In the late 90s, the group changed again a bit, in that the Deaconess merged with the Beth Israel Hospital, and our group moved on, first to join Boston University Medical Center with its freestanding, well-established residency training program. Shortly thereafter, several other hospitals and surgery centers were added, and the group grew at a very rapid rate. In closing, I would just emphasize that the overall theme of this group for many, many years has been safety in anesthesia. And clearly it's been one of the if not the leading group examining this approach. I just am certain that today the safety efforts are just as strong as ever, and no doubt as the group continues to enlarge and attract top-rate anesthesiologists and nurse anesthetists, we'll see no change in these attitudes.